When it comes to familicide, you hardly ever hear of it being done by the children. But when 16 and 18-year-old Michael and Robert Bever decided that they wanted to become famous, they thought the only way to achieve it would be becoming just like their heroes. This is the story of the Broken Arrow Massacre. At around 11:30 one night in July of 2015, a 911 operator responded to a call from a 12-year-old boy, Daniel Bever. He said he needed help and that his older brothers were attacking his family. There were a bunch of screaming and commotion in the background, and then the line went dead. The police called David Bever, the father of the household, but when he didn't answer his phone, they dispatched officers to the scene. And those officers arrived to a very gruesome sight. They walked up to a red splattered steps and knocked on the door. When they heard a small child's voice calling for help inside, they went in. There they found 13-year-old Crystal Bever clinging to life from her multiple wounds. Crystal ended up surviving the slangs, but she was injured very badly. She said she had two older brothers, Robert and Michael, and they lured her into their bedroom before attacking her with a blade. Autumn, Crystal's little sister, was also found alive and unharmed in her crib. However, neither the parents nor three of the other kids fared as lucky. The victims were the 52-year-old father, David, his 44-year-old wife, April, their 12-year-old son, Daniel, their 7-year-old son, Christopher, and their 5-year-old daughter, Victoria. The crime shook the town of Broken Arrow, and it was a familicide of shocking proportions. So how on earth did we get here? In order to understand why the crime occurred, we have to understand the inner workings of the young boys' minds. So Robert and Michael were the oldest two children in the Bever family. According to accounts from the brothers as well as the surviving victims, their family dynamic was not always a healthy one. They said their parents, April and David, were physically and emotionally abusive, and they believed their parents hated them. They said the only reason their parents kept having kids was for tax breaks. The boys had memories of their dad throwing them across the room, hurting their mom, and on top of all that, all the kids were homeschooled. Can you imagine how loud and chaotic that house must have been with 7 kids ranging from 2 to 18? And even though they were reported to have been homeschooled, no one ever saw them participating in the homeschooling groups in the community. The kids only had each other as friends and playmates, and Crystal said that none of their siblings had any outside friends. Neighbors said they hardly ever saw the children all those years that the Bevers lived there, calling them reclusive and private. Some of them hadn't even heard of all their children's name until the crime was published in the papers. So as you can imagine, when you're stuck in the house all the time with your siblings and you're homeschooled by your parents, you probably start to feel like an inmate in a prison. April Bever really wanted her kids to be successful, so she tried to get them interested in computer programming, but this would ultimately backfire on her, literally. Robert had turned to the internet as his window to the world, and he got really into watching YouTube videos, especially the darker, violent ones. That's when he decided to try starting a channel himself. He wanted to be famous and he would do just about anything to get there. Robert recruited Michael, the sibling he was closest to in age, to film skits and videos with him that the two would come up together. But the Bever brothers found something on the internet that started to fascinate them even more than YouTube: serial killers. But not in the way that average Killer Bite fans do. They started to idolize the monsters themselves and wanted to be just like them. They learned about Columbine and the Aurora Theater massacres and started to look up the perpetrators as their idols. The two would stay up late at night talking, and when they realized that they were both passionate about the same thing, that's when they put their plan into action. They decided that they were going to gain fame and notoriety by carrying out a massacre of massive proportions. Now, a lot of familicide cases actually go unsolved, but these brothers confessed to everything when the police caught up with them, mostly so they could get publicity for their crimes. So Michael was Robert's sidekick throughout it all, first helping make skits with him for his YouTube channel, and then as his literal partner in crime. Robert decided he needed to stock up on weapons if they were going to go through with their plan. He stocked up on some items like machetes, masks, gloves, you know, the usuals. Crystal even went to her mom about her brother's behavior during this time and told her that she was worried, but April was just like, boys will be boys, and didn't think much of it. But on July 22nd, the boys would make a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their adult lives. However, they didn't just want to take out their family. No, they wanted to go bigger. They planned to steal the family car after everyone was gone and go on a mass slaying spree. Their goal was to take out at least 50 people, but they hoped for 100. This is one of those cases where you really wonder how much of this was nature versus nurture. So were they born monsters or were they created? Can we solely blame the internet for something like this? As the officers searched the house for any other survivors, they were probably wondering the same things. In total, these boys took out 5 of their family members, with Crystal getting life-saving help from the paramedics, and 2-year-old Autumn, who was left unscathed when the boys had to flee after they heard the sirens. The boys did tell the officers that they had planned to use an axe on little Autumn. So these guys are monsters, like actual monsters. But where were Robert and Michael? The police couldn't find them anywhere at the house, and they saw that the back door had been left open. Canines tracked the scent of the gruesome twosome to some woods behind the house. and they also found a trail of the weapons discarded along the way. But if they thought this breadcrumb trail was terrifying, they could have never truly been prepared when they came along Hansel and Gretel themselves. The Muddy Buddies were found hiding in a bush, and their arrest photos are some of the most horrific things you will ever see. Both of the boys were covered head to toe in, well, their family members. Darkening brown and red stains covered every inch of their faces and bodies, and their clothes were torn and slashed, barely hanging on their bodies. Their arrest pictures pretty much went viral because the photos told you everything you needed to know about how they felt about what they had done. In younger brother Michael's photo, his arms were cuffed behind his back, and he stared at the camera with a blank face. His shirt was pretty much being held up by his collar, and his entire chest was exposed from the ribs, revealing his stained, dirty arms. If that's not enough nightmare fuel for you, wait until you see Robert's photo. Robert was pretty much in the same shape as his brother. Multiple photos and angles were taken of him showing the gore and mess all over his clothes as well, with his hands casually cuffed behind his back. But the one thing about Robert's photo that chilled people to the bone was the fact that he's smiling straight into the camera. That's right, through his stringy, wet hair that sat over his eyes and the layers of dried stains on his face, his tightly closed lips were curled up into a smile. And his blue eyes that stood out in sharp contrast through the dark splatters were practically twinkling at the camera with pride. But not only did the state of the boys tell the cops everything that they needed to know, Robert just straight up told them as well. He gave the cops a quick plot synopsis of what actually went down a few hours ago and said he was really proud of what he had done. While Robert's confession tape to the police had never been released to the public, Michael's was. In the video, the investigator pretended like he was brand new on the case and asked Michael to catch him up to speed on what actually went down. Obviously, the cops would never do that, but this was a technique he used in order to get Michael to feel comfortable enough to talk. Michael was happy to spill. He said he and his older brother decided around 2 months ago to butcher their family, then go on their crime spree. And Michael had a speech impediment, and you could hear in the video. He had trouble pronouncing his R's, which only made the interrogation that much more sinister to hear a soft-spoken young boy talk about how his older brother and he were planning on buying weapons and body armor to go on a rampage. Michael said that at first, he didn't think his brother was serious when he started getting into voodoo and crime. But when he started stockpiling weapons, he realized the dude was for real. At this point in the interview, you can kind of tell that it hit Michael what he was confessing to, and he started to clarify a few things for the officer to try to cover his tracks. He said that he didn't actually take out anyone, that Robert was the one who did all the assassinating. Michael said he only used his blade to jab his 7-year-old brother, Christopher. The detective then asked Michael what Christopher said as he attacked him, and Michael said he was just screaming. When he heard this, the detectives literally had to pause to compose himself and keep his cool demeanor, but you could very clearly see that he was holding back tears. You know it's a bad crime when even the most hardened of detectives can't keep it together. So Robert ordered a bunch of firearms and ammo to be delivered directly to their home in order to carry out their crime spree as soon as it arrived. Because only in America can you get weapons of mass destruction delivered right to your front door like a freaking FabFitFun box. But obviously, with their helicopter parents watching over them at all times, the boys knew that this plan wouldn't fly. They decided that their entire family would have to be gone the day before the shipment arrived. They planned on using their assortment of blades and swords on their family that night while they slept, then cutting them up and hiding them to pieces in the attic. The very next day, when their packages arrived, they took the family car and be off on their trip of terror with the plan to let loose on any random person who crossed their path. That was the plan, at least. Obviously, things didn't go accordingly. As the boys were excitedly putting on their body armor, Crystal came in to talk to them. With that, Michael asked Robert if they should just begin their plan right then and there. Robert agreed. The boys told Crystal to come over and look at something on the computer, and as soon as she did, they grabbed her and began running her through with the blade. Their own sister. It's an absolute miracle that she survived. The detective asked Michael the one question that everyone wanted to know. Why would they want to do something like this? Michael explained that his brother hated everybody and thought society as a whole was pointless. He also said he wanted to beat the body count of other famous criminals like the Columbine kids and James Holmes, the guy who committed the movie theater massacre in Aurora. Michael said he didn't necessarily have a problem with society, but he did like the idea of trying to beat the body count, so he was in. The whole time you could tell the guy was questioning Michael was really trying to keep it together, but he was freaked out. He's this middle-aged guy with a shiny, bald head and a kind, unassuming face. Throughout the interview, his head became more and more pink as Michael answered questions, and he had to take multiple moments to pause, clearing his throat and rubbing his eyebrows as he tried to figure out the next move. Finally, the investigator asked Michael if they didn't like their parents, saying he'd understand because most teenagers don't. Michael said that his mom was alright, but his dad... The investigator went, "He was a bit much?" And Michael nodded, while starting to smile, "Yeah, I think so." The detectives knew that Michael was not being truthful and tried to get him to confess more. They said he had done so much of the planning. How could he have just taken a backseat on the day and not done anything? But when they started to talk to him about how Robert was going to get all the fame and credit for the crime, he finally admitted to also using the weapon to attack his family members. Sure enough, the next day, nearly 3,000 rounds of ammo was delivered to the Bever household in Robert's name, proving that a crime spree really was going to be in the cards for them. Michael and Robert were both tried as adults, despite the fact that Michael was 16. They both took the not guilty plea, but Robert later changed his plea to guilty to avoid lethal injection. Michael tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but when Crystal took the stand to describe how her brothers had planned the attack and lured her into the bedroom, they knew someone who had calculated something like that had to have been in their right mind. Right mind. A flash drive was later retrieved from the home that contained all the plans for their attack, as well as the camera and surveillance equipment in the home that the boys had planned to use to film the familicide. The boys said that they planned on making 2 videos of the crime, one that showed the crime with the bodies of their investigators, and one without for their YouTube channel. So they literally said this and went on to plead not guilty? That's unreal. Both brothers were charged and sentenced to life in prison, Michael with the possibility of parole and Robert without. Authorities called the massacre the worst single criminal event in Broken Arrow history. Psychologists and behavioral experts alike tried to figure out what was in the Bever brothers' brains that could explain how something like that could have happened. Was it trauma, schizophrenia, psychopathy, brain damage? I mean, they came up empty. Not even a report of the bump on the noodle was found in the boys' files. Crystal testified that while their dad could be explosive on occasion, there was nothing he did that would warrant something of this degree. After the fact, the Bever house stood empty on Magnolia Street as a sort of macabre tourist attraction for years before it mysteriously burned down one night. In its place, they built a park in 2019 called Reflection Park. We'll see you next time.